So thank you all for your presentations. As I say, I've got quite a few questions written down on my panel here. So I'm going to open the first one up, if you don't mind, unless Sandy, ladies first. No? Okay, I'll go first. It's a really interesting program. I'm very excited to be a part of it, but what advice would you give other organisations that they've sat here, they've watched this online, and they've gone, oh my word, I want to be involved in this. I think our organisation has got data that needs to be put into it, or our organisation can get information out of it to help make better tactical decisions, or our organisation's got a really cool thing that could plug into it using the APIs, etc. What advice would you give them right now if they want to get involved, to either prepare themselves or to get involved now? Alex, you're probably the best person to start with on this.
So I think, we've got organisations that are coming in and participating in particular elements and providing some in-kind resource in. We obviously also tender work out, and a lot of that is going on through the Accelerated Capability Framework, which is something that it's a Home Office framework, so we let a lot of work out through that. But obviously what we're really interested in is organisations that are keen to come and participate in the demonstrator work and potentially add things into that, and come up with ideas about things that they believe would be useful and helpful in that space. So I think that it really depends the sort of nature of how people want to get involved in that. There are sort of probably three key routes to doing that. So it would depend on exactly what people wanted to do.
So would their sort of first port of call be a communication with the Department for Trade and Industry through you, or would that be through Steve and Iain on the Telecent team, or what's their opening gambit?
So realistically, I won't put that on to Telecent because that would be very unfair. It needs to be really through, and it's Department of Business and Trade, Iain. So it would need to be really myself or my colleague Barry Blackwell at Department of Business and Trade. My email address was at the end of my presentation, so please do feel free to get in touch if this is something that you're interested in, and we can certainly have a chat about what that looks like, what you're particularly interested in terms of the programme, and how you could potentially contribute to it in that way.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alex. Sorry, I'm hugging the questions. My apologies. Sandy.
Hi, thanks. So I really loved the big box of boring. It was actually quite interesting as opposed to boring. Do you think this will help us? We've got a lot of organizations in the UK, like the NHS and the Armed Forces and the police, who are not necessarily in the best of shape in terms of their data systems. Do you think that can actually help us to get better linkage between them?
I mean, it's probably a two-part answer to this question, one which I'll leave to Iain in the room there. But the first part is the work we're doing right now with Alex is actually generating interest across departments, and with the flexibility of IES, as Iain described, and with the ability for the data effectively to be shared that we're trying to do through the core platform for the integration architecture, I think there's definitely an opportunity for other government departments to get themselves out of some of those data problems. One of the key things that we're seeing with some of our early stakeholders who are using core is that ability to run it alongside their existing infrastructure, their existing capability, and also to then start effectively using core as a greenfield that they can build new internal capability on, so they can increase their confidence in that data, and then have the confidence to share it with the outside world. Iain, I don't know in the room there if there's anything else you wanted to add to that.
No, other than I've got it. We did try and have a chat with the NHS, but it's such a big amorphous organ. I don't even know where you'd start. And the police is kind of the opposite problem. There are 40 odd police forces, and they all buy their own systems, so you can't talk to them as one. So yeah, they'd both be great customers, I agree, but they've both got slightly different problems that prevent them from doing something like this.
I think it's one of the things I've seen with a lot of the major projects out there is that they procure a lot of different systems that are the best of breed for doing various different things. But one of the big expenses that they have is getting a team in to try and integrate all those particular systems and databases and things that are going to help them to make really good quality decisions based on the data from all those systems. And I do wonder whether something like this, which is open source and supported and would help their major project also integrate into the bigger world, whether that would be a really good option for future major projects to adopt and move forward with.
Yeah, it'd be amazing if we could. Yeah.
I think it'd be really exciting. Personally, I think it'd be exciting. I'm going to steal the microphone one more time for a question here. You mentioned, Iain, about standards and ontology and the fact that the IES world is very much the higher level part of the ontology, so down to the almost the facility level, as it were. And I get really excited about that because and I'm not sure if the rest of the world, the room has had the same frustration with the Uniclass classification system out there. I find it very fragmented in that I've got 20 different doors, but at the same time I've got 20 different ways of describing a railway station. I need a single thing that says it's railway station, and the bits below that I'm happy with. Let the Uniclass world deal with that, but I would like to have something that allows me to be a little bit more solid about what I'm going to be calling my facilities and my major pieces of infrastructure, so we're all talking about the same thing.
Yeah, that's where it stops. I think mostly because it was as far as I can tell, at best, it wasn't a hugely funded exercise. It was just a bunch of frustrated civil servants and military who wanted to solve a data exchange problem. So they kind of built a standard to do it. So yeah, they didn't have the expense to the budget to go build a big taxonomy of the world. I think given a chance they might have done, but luckily they didn't. They kind of stopped at that point. I think that's been the sweet spot really.
But it's one thing we have the data talking to each other, but it's another thing if organizations are actually willing to share their data.
So that's where the other standard comes in. So Steve mentioned that there's another standard came out of government. So anyone's working with the MOD at the moment, they'll have heard the term data-centric security mentioned. And that's the idea that once the data enters the boundary of the organization, it's labeled with its security label. So that's what Steve showed in his demo. There's a couple of NATO standards, STANAGs, for this now. And we've implemented that standard for the NDT as well. So the data carries its security labels with it wherever it goes inside the secure boundary. And when it hits the boundary filters the stuff you're not allowed to see, but lets the stuff out that you are. And it can do that at a very fine grain level. And that came out of the national security community where they were trying to balance that need to share versus need to know. You want to share as much as you can to prevent loss of life or disasters or anything like that. But equally, there's some stuff you can't share. And traditional methods meant blocking an entire database from a whole community of people or entire document or an entire data set. Whereas with this fine grain ABAC approach that Steve was talking about, you can filter, Steve was able to filter out people's names there, for example. So that I think is one of the most exciting bits about it. It's a separate standard to IES, but you put the two together, that kind of expressivity of IES and that ability of EDH or ICIHM, it's had a few names over the years, or data-centric security, whatever you want to call it, to filter and secure the data. I think you've got quite a powerful combination there.
Brilliant. Thanks, Iain. So got two questions in the room. I'm going to start down here, if I may.
What are the significant milestones in the project? What is the go live date? And how are you securing funding for the project?
They're all over my pay grade. I'm looking straight at Alex for that one.
So, Iain, can you repeat that? Sorry.
What are the significant milestones in the project? What is the tentative go live date? And how are you securing funding to make the project a reality?
Okay, so starting with the last one first, I suppose, really. So we have funding up until the end of this comprehensive spending review period, which, strictly speaking, is March 2025. Obviously, at some point between now and then, we will have a general election. So that will cause a little bit of hiatus in the funding. But if we just take it in the way that government usually works, put the general election to one side, we have funding to the end of March 2025. We would anticipate starting bidding for further funding in roughly April 2024. It takes about a year to go through spending review. It is a joy, can only be described as. And we would be looking then to secure funding for a further 5 years worth of work. And I think by what we're sort of talking about at the moment, we've got a big piece of road mapping work going on, which is looking at where do we realistically want to be by 2030, 2031-ish, and what would we need to do in advance of that to get to that perspective. So then we can look and say, well, actually, if that's where we want to be, if that's the ambition, how realistic is that? And do we either need to push more funding into it, or do we need to alter the end ambition? But I would say at the moment where we are is that what we need to be able to show by 2030, 2031 is that you can demonstrate the ability to drive value, to enhance decision making through the use of the ability of sharing information and technology to be able to process that information in a way that enables people to make those better decisions. So we would need to be able to say, by that point, we would need to have all of those rules of the road in place in order to that people could start creating those tools and to be able to connect them together. So I wouldn't say, would we have a national digital twin by 2030, 2031? No, I don't think that is realistic. I don't think you would be able to connect everything maybe you'd want to connect, or every user would be able to connect what they need to be able to connect. But I think one of those underpinning requirements would be in place. There is then a view as to how do you get to a position where that becomes a self-sustaining model. Is that something that government does ultimately want to maintain a stake in, or do you need to be able to commercialize it in some way so that it becomes self-sustaining? So there's elements that you need to maintain. There is income being generated by certain types of information sharing that would then sustain those building blocks that would need to be sort of probably more centrally owned to maintain a national digital twin. So then I think in terms of sort of significant milestones, I think the way that we are trying to deliver the projects is to ensure that we are banking benefit as we go along. So using the outputs from the demonstrators to generate assets, and then be able to test them across different users, and across different scales, and then be able to push those out for use by others more widely. So I would hope that on a reasonably regular basis, we will, as we gain traction in this, and as we've got more of the demonstration work under our belts, we'll be able to start pushing those out.
Thanks, Alex. We have a question from the audience.
Thank you very much. It's Richard Scott from TwinView. First of all, before I came this morning, I didn't know very much about National Digital Twin, and I've learned an awful lot. I think it has been a fantastic presentation. And I think also the narrative has been really interesting from the, the overall concept, the gin fuel data acquisition, and then the naming standards, and then how you analyze that data. Clearly, you're going to be generating massive amounts of information, multi-dimensional kind of data, and the scope of scaling this is huge. So I think the question, and this comes from my inner geek, just like Iain has, is, and I guess for the technical people, with this, this huge amount of information, we see a lot every day about, rise of AI, generative AI, and so on. My question is, what role do you see AI playing in this, in kind of understanding and getting, really getting the insights, from this huge amount of data that you're generating and working with?
Iain, I'm going to be really cowardly and ask you to see if you've got a response to that.
Well, you've got EarthEye later on. So EarthEye, it's a machine learning company. So they're using neural nets to pull features out of images. and they can do that in real time, and they can do that multispectral, so they can use radar information as well as thermal and visual to predict what things are going to do. Then there's the whole prediction algorithm bit. They're not actually probably one of the weakest bits of AI at the moment. There's things like Prophet from Facebook and stuff like that about predicting when systems are going to fail, but they're getting better, and the more data they throw at them, they get better as well. And I guess the other side of it is the human interface. This is complex data. You can probably train large language models around this to be able to present that information in a more interactive way with users. So those are the immediate ones: prediction, communication, and detection, I guess. So EarthEye certainly is. They're coming up shortly.
So EarthEye are part of the project. Also, actually, I'm going to chip in on this one as well, because we're looking, as you can see, what's been going on so far, it's about connecting those things and looking at the interdependencies of those bits. But the actual Carver analysis that the Royal Engineers did that was still the manual bit, because that's up to me as an engineer to look at it and go, oh, it's got a bund around it, it's not going to flood, or it's got a security fence, or it's above ground, it's on a stilt, it's below ground, or whatever it is. So I can make up my minds about vulnerability. A lot of that, of course, can be taken from imaging. It also can be dragged out of the internet. And if you apply some form of artificial intelligence to that, to be able to understand the vulnerabilities of certain types of things. When you think about the vulnerability of a security camera compared to the vulnerability of a concrete slab, well, we know the security camera is quite shiny and people want to nick it and probably damage it because they want to commit crimes around it, whereas the concrete slab is very difficult for me to kind of like pick up, put in my pocket, and it's not really something I need to steal because, well, it's very difficult to resell a concrete slab. But it's that sort of thing that we're looking to apply artificial intelligence. So I've just done a whole load of this around looking at how to define the security rating of assets within a major project, using Carver analysis to understand each of the systems within that major project, which will allow us to then understand what the security rating of each of those systems is, and then understand what level of security that information should be within all those systems. So the artificial intelligence side of that is going to help us to do that in a much faster way, because at the moment it is me looking at something, understanding what I can find, and then giving that over. But yes, AI is reducing things dramatically in that environment. I've been playing a lot with ChatGPT recently, and that has cut some of my work by months. It's great. Probably not very secure though.
I think
we had a question on the side, and then we have one at the back.
Sorry, sorry, it's going to come in. So I think, yes, there is no doubt AI is going to be part of the solution. I think when we talk about digital twins, we are thinking about a combination of technologies. So what we need to understand is, what are the different combinations we need for different things? Where do they add value? But really thinking very much from the beginning, which is obviously very relevant given a lot of the conversations that are going on about AI at the moment, is thinking about these issues right at the beginning, and how do we deploy these technologies in a way that is going to be trusted, that's going to be safe, that's going to be appropriately safe, appropriately secure, provide people with the trust they need, and make sure that we are doing this in a way that is also ethical and sustainable. Those are not easy things to do. They are very hard problems that lots of people are looking at, and we were going to need to work with some very clever people in this space. But I think it's absolutely right that we look at these things right at the beginning, rather than just necessarily deploying them, particularly in something like a national program, deploying them and then wondering afterwards whether we've done it in the right way. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done in this space before we without charging headlong into it.
Thanks, Alex.
So have you identified a way for legacy asset owners going through digitization or new build projects to deliver a data schema that feeds into the NDT dataset? And how do we incentivize that to get the asset owners to do it?
Sorry, could you just repeat the last part of that question?
Yeah, sure. Basically, how do we get new builds, legacy builds to produce data sets that feeds into the NDT program? How do we get asset owners producing data that is better for the NDT side?
I think there's two parts in. I'll let Iain jump in, Iain Bailey jump in with some detail if you'd like to. But I think there's two parts to that question. The first part is obviously getting the system to a point where those data owners trust that their data is going to be handled appropriately into the system. Once you have that, one of the big things about the NDT and one of the big things about the integration architecture is it's not quite the what sort of data do they need to, or they need to think about the data that they need to describe to better improve their environment, rather than thinking about how they push that into the NDT. It's very much around. This is not really about saying we're going to come and park some NDT tanks on your lawn and you will cooperate. It's actually, can we help you improve your own data? And once you've done that, you can then bring that back through to the NDT in confidence using the tooling inside of the system, the adaptions, the mapping tooling that we described. I really think there's a slight change of conversation. It's around how can we help you get better at managing your own data, rather than saying, what do you need to do to put into the NDT?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, because I think what we found before with the way that we were looking at the information management framework was, if you want to come and play in this space, you are going to have your data in this format and at this level of quality. And that's just not adoptable. It's not realistic that organizations are going to be able to do that. What we have to be able to say is, you can come and do this at the pace at which you feel comfortable. And rather than say all of the data must be at this quality, it actually becomes more important that the user can understand the quality of the information and therefore start making a decision about whether it's fit for the purpose to which they want to be able to put it. The advantage, obviously, as well with the the things that the integration architecture brings is that you can also start to improve the quality of your information and see the benefit of doing that before you necessarily share it. But what we need to be able to demonstrate is come in, try it, and then see. And I think this is very true of the conversations we had on the Isle of Wight with the stakeholders was, well, actually, we'll do something, we'll show you. And then they start getting enthused by it and start looking at, oh, well, what would happen if, or could we bring this in? And they start to really do it from we can see the value of it and the benefit to us and the decisions we are trying to make. And that's a far more compelling argument than trying to persuade, which I think is, we're onto a lost winner anyway. If we do that, is, come in and do all of this stuff, invest all of this resource in improving your information, and I promise you great things will happen at some point in the future. That's just not something that is going to be appealing or even realistic that organizations are going to do that.
Yeah, we'd very much like to be able to provide tooling with the core integration architecture that gives you the ability to improve your own operations, and then almost as a byproduct, you provide better quality data into the NDT. It's very much about working with your processes. As I said during the presentation there, if we come in and say, hey, in order to take apart, as Alex just mentioned, all you've got to do is change everything you do, you're not going to make that business case internally. So it's about showing, here's a tool set that will allow you to improve your information. You'll get to test that improvement. You get to build some capability on it as well if you want to. And when you're happy, you can share it at the NDT. It's a much softer journey for people to make a start on than the sort of the very, very high barrier to entry that was originally proposed.
Yeah, I just add to that with these kind of things, if you can shorten that risk reward cycle, so you've got to put a lot of effort in, and as Alex says, in 2 years' time you'll see some grand. What you want is lots of little incremental gains that persuade people, get them addicted to it, do a bit more. So it's building and building and building, and then tooling to make it easier. And all these grand ideas about everyone's going to know about 4D ontologies. Well, they're not. They can't expect everyone to be a guru on that. So we've done a lot of work around producing open source Python toolkits for generating IES data simply. And then when you talk to the implementers building the apps, we thought they'd all be really cool and interested in graph databases, but they all know SQL. They want to use SQL queries. So we're thinking about making that available for the same data. And how do you do that? So just lowering the barrier to entry and then shortening that reward period for putting the effort in.
I think, even though obviously my microphone's over there, but I can to stand next to Iain very briefly and just talk loudly. I think it's that incremental value thing, to me, is really, really important, is proving the value at each stage and then moving forward. And once you've proved it again, move forward again. And doing it in those little bits, massively important, because we can't go and predict a beautiful future in 20 years' time and not actually get there, because we're all thinking about things that are going to happen in the future and not concentrating on what we can do here and now to add value to all our organisations. Question from Max at the back.
Question and a comment. So I'll start with a comment, just touching back on the AI and how AI might be used here. I see the sort of the benefit of AI and machine learning starting off with as verification of data, taking that manual grunt work out that a human has to currently do, go through the spreadsheets. Does this tally with this? Does this make sense? Using machine learning to make sure that data is coming in a format that is usable, is quality, the right quantity, the right time periods, all the checks and balances that you'd normally have to do manually. I see that's where AI is really going to benefit in the short term. In the long term, obviously, we can then have AI for prediction, AI for data modeling, and then building up additional information into those systems by aggregating lots of different data sets together. But to start off with, I see the AI being really the validation verification. And that really leads on to my question is, who defines what is quality data? Because obviously, if it's not going to be contractually binding, hey, you need to provide it in this format, you need to provide it with this quality, who makes the determination that the data is of a high enough quality for it to support not only National Digital Twin, because with all of these different stakeholders, people want, oh, we need more granularity on this, or we need more time sensitive or time detail on this. So who makes that determination so that when you are providing data contractually in the future, because one would assume you'd have to have a carrot and a stick to make sure that people behave, who would make that determination of what is good data, what is of value?
So if I pretend I'm Matthew West, and Matthew West was the guy we mentioned earlier who wrote a book on this subject. His book's called High Quality Data Models. And when you first read it, you think, oh, it's about producing data models that are high quality. But actually what he's getting at is, if your data models are good enough and rigorous enough, it forces quality into the data because it exposes the gaps at the point of production. So he's really keen on that idea. And I think there's a lot to it. I've worked with data quality for donkey's years now, and the typos and the missing fields, they're the easy bits to deal with. It's the stuff you don't spot. It's the semantic errors that are in the data that only emerge a year later when you connect it to something else and realize it's not quite right. I'm not sure what we can do about that for now, other than keep learning what these things are when they occur. Maybe we can train systems to pick it up. In the short term, we've got a data standard and we need a way to enforce the rules of that data standard and make sure people are producing data that's compliant. So there's a constraint language called shackle, and we're just starting a piece of work now to produce shackle constraints for the IES model. So you can automatically check the data coming in and get reports on where it's wrong, where it's good, where you've got warnings and so on. So that's some work we want to do. Alex was reading up on shackle the other day, I noticed as well. So we've obviously got a fan on semantic web constraint languages now as well. So.
Stand close to you again to continue this quick question. So the IES world, if there's an organisation out there that wants to get more involved in IES and wants to be a part of that development process, does that come through Department of Business and Trade as well, or is that through? Is there an IES group that they can get in contact with and put their shoulders to the load?
I think DBT is doing more than anyone else at the moment, but there's also mod through DSTL. So DSTL hosts a GitHub site with the standard specification on it, and we run drop-in sessions and things like that for people to come in and talk about what they want in the standard and all that kind of stuff. So I would say probably if you're in the digital twin sector, Alex is your first port of call. If you're in the military, then DSTL, a chap called Paul Cripps in DSTL.
Brilliant. So I think it's well worthwhile getting other, obviously, a broader spectrum of people involved. Brilliant.
Definitely.
Okay.
Another question from the audience?
James Locke, Arcadis IBI Group. A lot of my question really just got answered related to Max's questions and that conversation around quality there, but I think there's an outstanding part just to clarify understanding. With respect to data quality, obviously you can't force something on your users. The idea is to encourage them. But in terms of the NDT and IS4, the standard you're using, does it have a strong and clarified way to, append and communicate the quality of the data? That's something that was kind of alluded to earlier, but I wasn't clear on if that's actually forced into your data formats so that other users can see.
No, it's because of its origins, and it comes from this kind of dark and shady area of police work, and police work's probably not dark and shady, but intelligence community and military and all that kind of stuff. That they deal with really messy, partial data. They're not sure about the accuracy. There's a lot of work going on at the moment on how do you model uncertainty in this kind of data, and how do you compare one opinion with another and try and work out what the base truth is. But what it will do is it will show you where those holes are in glaring technicolor. There'll be a huge gap in your graph where that data is missing if it's not there. But it will allow you to put bad data in there because sometimes that's all you've got, and there's weighing that pragmatism up of allowing in bad data. And I think probably, as Alex was saying earlier, over time you start to turn the tap off a little bit on the bad data. But to get started, you've got to allow a bit of some of the rough stuff in there to start with. I think that I'm probably gone completely against government policy there, Alex, but.
I think Iain, if I just come in, I think also we've got to look at issues around authoritative sources of data. We're going to have to start thinking about that. We're going to have to start thinking about how we understand provenance. So there is a lot that we are going to have to pick away at and look at not only the technical solution around that as well, but the policy wrappers that we're going to need, the information we're going to need, the metadata, if you like, that's going to have to be carried to enable users to start making decisions about whether they want to use that data or not.
I think one of the other things that will drop out, it's, again, technically we don't have it yet. It's a piece of work that we're looking to start later this year. This idea of a sort of a data catalog for each data provider or data owner, which they would have to maintain as part of being part of the NDT, which will allow them to describe the quality of that data and the purposes and uses it might be fit for. And I think, as both Alex and Iain said, you might have to start with a low level, but give people the ability to say, you know what, I'm not going to pull from that source because it's not authoritative. But in a very quick and dirty analogy, you might say, actually, I do need to pull through it because it's time sensitive. I think we've got to go through that. So technically, we'll build capability that allows us to describe the data, but it's the policy wrapper that will become really important there.
Brilliant, excellent. Thank you very much indeed. If there are no, we've got one more question. Excuse me. I shall do the running this time, Sandy. I can't believe I brought in a fantastic chair and I made her run up and down the room all the time instead of me.
Thank you, Iain. Steve Slater from Waste Group. Question I've got is, you talked about user adoption, and do you think that it will be mandated, the use of digital twins by the government for government projects?
Well, that's a controversial question. Well, I mean, government tends to it'll call things mandates when they're not really mandates. So supposedly we had a BIM mandate that really wasn't a mandate at all. I think if you look at the Transforming Infrastructure Performance Roadmap, they are potentially setting out some, warming the audience up, maybe, I would say, to the idea there might be a mandate around digital twins at some point in the future. Obviously, that's probably most likely to apply to central government departments. And the reason they tend to do that is obviously because it's a good way of starting to move the market, because government, being such a huge client, tends to start to move the supply chain to meet that demand. So I think there's a possibility there will be some sort of, so say, mandate in the future. But but you're probably looking at that maybe coming in sort of in the late 2020s. It won't be anytime soon, because you've obviously got to have enough in place that that mandate, in the loosest possible sense, could be met. So it has to be at the right time, but there will also, and you need to also warn people if it is going to happen, so that they are preparing for it.
Okay. Is there, along those lines, Alex, is there anything you can say to people to prepare for this? Things that they need to keep into their minds? Or is it just a watch this space at the moment?
I think at the moment there's no certainty there will be a mandate, so I think it is a bit of watch this space. I think there's also so much interest in this area anyway that there will be significant progress made, regardless of whether a mandate happens or not. I think the mandate could just be used to provide some consistency across that, I suppose, and I suppose to take sort of the principles that the NDTP is sort of setting out around, particularly, as I said, things like safety, security, trust, etc., and ensuring that when the government at any rate is procuring digital twins and connecting digital twins, that they do comply with those requirements. There's obviously also an issue around whether that would get, within certain sectors, whether things would get regulated. So things like the civil, nuclear, rail, those sorts of sectors that tend to be more regulated anyway, is there a role for that in there as well? I think at the moment it's very much up for discussion. As I said, we are also doing this big piece of road mapping work, and we are looking at issues like that within the road mapping work. And we are looking for people who are interested in those particular areas to come and get involved and look at how we map that out and what that breaks down into from a sort of, so what does it look like at a strategic level, but actually in reality, how does that break down into individual sort of bite-sized projects? And we've clearly got a lot of issues that we need to be looking at, understanding how we deliver those. Again, if there are people that are interested in getting involved in that and understanding more about that road mapping work, again, please do get in touch, because we are going to need to pull on the expertise that is out there within industry and academia, as well as sort of the government input into that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. And if there are no more questions in the room, I'm out of questions now. Sandy, anything from you? All brilliant. Okay, I just want to say thank you very much, Steve, Alex, Ian, and myself, for a presentation. Also, thank you very much for delivering the questions to some of our questions, some of our answers. Well, I think actually probably there were some more questions to our answers, as well as answers to our questions. So thank you once again for that. And what we will do is we're going to move on to our lunch break. Now, lunch isn't set out yet because we are a little early. Okay, we're about to bring it through, so that's not too bad. But otherwise, just to say thank you very much, Steve, Alex, and Ian. Give them a round of applause. Thank you very much indeed.